All right, welcome back. Today is our second lesson on the structure of the Canadian government. The Canadian government is the first chapter of our textbook, and there's a lot of potential memorization in there. And I'm not sure I really want to pursue that path of academic learning. I don't want this to be a course where it's just about rote learning, where you have to memorize, this person sits here in the House of Commons, or this person sits there in the House of Commons. But I want you to, more than just memorizing, I'd like you to be able to understand the concepts of the Canadian government. So I'm going to review some concepts from yesterday, and I'm also going to apply some of them here today. So definitely good to see your notes out. You can add stuff to the notes that you took yesterday, because no doubt as I respin the stuff, there might be some new understanding explained. And we will be adding some stuff today as well. So, one thing we covered yesterday was that we have three branches of government. So yesterday we talked about how we have the legislative branch. The legislative branch in Canada would be the branch that makes the laws. So federally we have the House of Commons and the Senate. And it's interesting to note that the Senate is not elected. And because the Senate is not elected, some people see it as not as effective nor as democratic as it could or should be. They may be next door. Cleveland had them this morning. So the House of Senate and the House of Commons combined at the federal level would be our legislative branch that makes the laws. So why would a law be made? Well, as a constituent, as an individual who lives in a constituency, as a constituent, you may contact your MP and you may be asking your MP to create some change in Ottawa. And that change may be involving an introduction of a new law. So laws sometimes can be created by the people, you and I, putting pressure on our elected members to create something that better represents our wishes. Often, the process from a bill to become a law can be quite lengthy, as it goes through multiple readings in the House of Commons and the Senate. And in this process, the Senate provides a sober second thought. So when we looked at the Senate yesterday, one of the main concepts we put related to the Senate is that although it is unelected, it still serves a purpose in the Canadian parliamentary structure. And that is to provide a sober second thought, meaning House of Commons can sometimes be emotional. House of Commons, in fact, it is meant to be the elected commoners, right? So they have the lack of the long-term vision that the Senate has. Senators are appointed for life. They can work until they're 75. They can be appointed at as young as 30 years old. They don't need to seek re-election. So because senators are appointed for life, their decision-making is more sober. So they are not as emotional, and therefore the Senate does play this purpose of providing a sobering second thought. We also saw yesterday that the Reform Party in the 1990s had wanted some reform, some restructuring of the Senate. They wanted the Senate to be elected. And they said if it was elected, then it can be more effective. And it can be effective if it has equal power to the House of Commons. We have not seen that reform in Canada. One of the issues that I'd like you to wrestle with in this chapter is how can we reform the parliamentary system of Canada? Next Monday on our chapter evaluation, that's going to be part of the evaluation. Because I'm going to ask you, how would you respond to some of the issues within Canada's government? Another issue within our government is the idea of responsible government. Responsible government sounds ideal. It sounds like the government's behaving responsibly. But because of responsible government, the party in power federally often invoke party solidarity to force bills into passing into law. Meaning, if I'm a member of Trudeau's Liberal Party and there's an important bill before the House, he might use the party whip to come and visit me, and the party whip might say, we really need you to support the bill because you are a Liberal member after all. And I might say that, but the good people of Wetaskiwin don't support the bill, and I've been elected to represent them. It is a democracy, and my job is to represent the will of the people. And that is meant to be the heart of responsible government. The executive branch is responsible to the legislative branch, therefore to the people. But because the executive branch, they don't want to lose power, they may force the members that they can control within the legislative branch to vote along party lines, and therefore the link back to the will of the people has been lost. So I would suggest to you that responsible government, although ideal in practice, has been corrupted in Canada by the party system. We also looked at yesterday that in Canada this is more likely depending upon what type of government you have. We have a majority and a minority government. A majority government is when out of those 338 seats, someone gets to the magic number that you guys identified as 170, 50% plus one. If you have a minority government, meaning you don't have 50% plus one of the seats in the House of Commons, then to pass bills into law, you're going to need someone from the other party to support you. So currently, Trudeau's government is a Liberal government that is a minority government, meaning they don't have 170 seats out of the 338 in the House of Commons. So when they pass bills into law, they need some people in the Conservative Party or the NDP or the Bloc Québécois or the Greens to vote with them. So in order to get the Greens or the Bloc Québécois or the Conservatives or the NDP to vote with them, then they have to reach some kind of common ground. This may be more democratic, but it could also be dangerous in the sense that you may have minority parties that can't rule, and therefore we might need a re-election. Yesterday we also looked at the idea of Canada has an head of state that is not elected. We have as our head of state the Queen. We also have a head of government, the Prime Minister, that is not elected directly by all Canadians either, but is simply chosen as the individual who can best lead their party in the House of Commons that has the most seats. It has been said, therefore, that it may be more democratic if we could have separate elections for both of those positions. Similar to what the United States has, a separate ballot where in November they're going to be able to decide directly if they want to continue with President Trump or not. So our head of state and our head of government would be two separate people. In the U.S., it's only one. In Canada, our Senate is appointed. In the U.S., the Senate is elected. So even though we're both representative democracies, there are some subtle differences that are worth noting. In Canada, we also have talked about the party system, how we have NDP on the left of center, the Liberals more of a centrist party, and the Conservatives to the right of center. And we spent a lot of time talking about what those terms mean. We also have talked about the Constitution being the ultimate law of the land, and how there's a judicial branch, a third branch of government, separate from the executive and the legislative branch, that they must review the new legislation and see if it's fitting with the Constitution. So, having said that, here we are with a cartoon. I'm going to blow it up a little bit so we can see it a little bit better. One of the things I'd like to focus on this year is some of your abilities to analyze a cartoon. Cartoon like this could be on not your evaluation Monday, but your actual exam on the government unit. So if I put this cartoon on the exam on the government unit, the cartoon could be asking about Canada's branches of government. It could give you an opportunity to tell me that you know which branch does what job. But the cartoonist has drawn things in a way that they're trying to make a commentary about the branches of government. The building in the front, Anybody recognize what that building in the front is? That's Canada's House of Commons. That's where our legislative branch meets. So that's Parliament, right? That's Parliament, that's where the House of Commons is, that's where our legislative branch meets. They make the laws. But you can see that there's something different about the building in the front. What is something different about the building? Like if you bought the building in the front, why might you be disappointed? And by front, I'm referring to the building with the flag, right? It's not all there. It's a facade. A facade means that it's just a front. There's no substance behind it. I'm going to put the word facade on the side board. Maybe you can add it to your language. In case this cartoon comes up again on an exam, you can explain to me how there's a facade within it. That there's a false front. That from the street, you might look at Parliament and you might think it's a mighty building. But in fact, it's like just a fake front, like they would use in Hollywood. There's no real building there. It's just a facade. This isn't a cartoon that is meant to be making a commentary about architecture. The cartoon is meant to be making a commentary about the branches of government. So looking further, we can see another branch of government, the Supreme Court. That's the Judicial Branch. They're meant to be the ones interpreting the law. The Judicial Branch isn't a facade here. The Legislative Branch is. Being that this branch is it's all there. This one's a facade. And the title of the cartoon says, The Legislative Branch. What is the comment or the ideological perspective the cartoonist is making here? What are they suggesting? What is the cartoonist suggesting is the actual legislative branch of Canada? You can just shout it out. So the whole cartoonist says the legislative branch. So that's the topic of the cartoon. And this is typically what we think the legislative branch is, but it's a facade. And behind it is the Supreme Court. So the cartoonist is suggesting that the real legislative branch in Canada is maybe I'll sit down for a minute. Because I'm going to wait this one up. I'm going to wait till someone says it. The Supreme Court. It's the only other thing in the picture. If there's the giant Smurf back here, then it would be the Smurf. But the thing back there is the Supreme Court. So the suggestion is that, I'm going to put that down. The suggestion is what we think is the House of Commons is actually just a facade. And in reality, the real power comes from the Supreme Court. Now let's think about this. The Supreme Court interprets the laws. The legislative branch makes the laws. What's the logic here? What's the logic that the cartoonist is trying to promote? Well, the logic is that these laws can only be law if the Supreme Court ultimately says they're legal. So if the Supreme Court can rule that laws are illegal, then who's the real power here? It's not the elected members of Parliament, it's the Supreme Court. So the suggestion is that the Supreme Court has the ultimate power in this land to create laws, because laws created here can be overruled here. So they're only really truly law once they pass the approval of the Supreme Court, they're suggesting. Now, the approval of the Supreme Court is not an official step along the process. But if someone challenges a new law, the Supreme Court may decide that the law is illegal. Interesting to note, there is, and I'm going to write it on the side board so that you can write it in your notes there. There's a clause within the Constitution called the Notwithstanding Clause. And the Notwithstanding Clause, the purpose of it is that Parliament can actually say, you know, notwithstanding what's in the Constitution over there, we're going to do our own thing. So there is a clause in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Notwithstanding Clause, that allows Parliament to be a lot more than a facade. Parliament can actually, in that case, create a law that they already know is unconstitutional. And an example of an unconstitutional law that was created, notwithstanding the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, is Bill 101 from Quebec. The Charter of Rights and Freedoms includes language laws, but in the province of Quebec, they find themselves surrounded by Anglophone provinces and other countries, and in order to protect their distinct society, they created Bill 101, which means, notwithstanding what's in the Charter, we're going to force all signs to be French. So, the Notwithstanding Clause, Bill 101, would be evidence that maybe this cartoonist is wrong. That there's times when this is quite powerful, when parliaments actually override the Constitution. So you could see a cartoon like that on your midterm, on your political systems exam. It would give us an opportunity to talk about a facade. It would give us an opportunity for you to tell me that you understand what a notwithstanding clause is, and talk about Bill 101 or Quebec. It would give us an opportunity for you to tell me about the three branches of government and their functions, about if the Supreme Court is appointed or elected. It'd give you a chance to tell me about the bicameral nature of Parliament. So with that one cartoon, I could ask 8 or 10 questions. So it is a pretty important cartoon. I'm gonna be bold right now, and I'm gonna go ahead and guarantee it's on your midterm. So before we continue, any questions about the cartoon? Do you understand what a facade is? It's a false front. From the street, it looks like a building. Well, when you investigate closer, you realize it's just like cardboard. It's fake. So the message of this cartoonist is that the real legislative power comes from not from Parliament, but from the Supreme Court. And the evidence that might continue that is if the Supreme Court has had a tendency of overruling legislation, saying that these new laws are unconstitutional. Something the cartoonist is ignoring, though, is that Parliament has the ability to override the Constitution with the Notwithstanding Clause, as Quebec did with Bill 101. Last day we talked about the three branches of government. We've also talked about the Constitution. Just want to look at the language here a little bit. Putting things in green just because I want to remind myself what I want to make questions on the midterm about. Keep in mind, you see these same documents, so if you go back and study from them and see stuff in green, that should be an indication as to what's important to study. Now, there's some language within this preamble of the U.S. Declaration of Independence. There's some language within the preamble that says this thing's going to be a democracy. Again, a democracy is the rule by the people. What phrase here, what words in combination say, you know what, this is going to be a democracy? So if you're going to pick a section and say, oh man, that's why it's a democracy. What's the best 3 or 4 words in a row, a phrase, that really announces this to be a democracy. Yes?
That all men are created equal.
Okay, so all men are created equal. Certainly, the idea that, some people don't have rights that others have, that's core to a democracy, right? So in Canada, we're a democracy. Everyone has the same freedom of speech. It's not just Irish people that get to speak, it's everyone. So because that we're all created equal, that's something you'd expect to see in a democracy. Your hand was up as well?
It is the right of people.
It is the right. It is the right of the people. Yeah, it is the right of the people. The people. People is the foundation of this system. And that's a democracy, right? It's the people-centered. So when it says that they get their powers from the consent of the governed, that means that in order for the government to act as a government, they must do it with the will of the people. Consent of the governed there means will of the people. Will of the people means it's a democracy. So if the question on the midterm said, which phrase here reflects the fact that the government must do the will of the people, consent of the governed means the same thing. If it said, which phrase here talks about the idea that within a democracy everyone's equal, then the phrase that you pointed out would be great. It is the right of the people, right? And that's even in capitals, right of the people. And that also is promoting that at the core, this is a people-centered society. We've talked about Prime Minister and Cabinet. Cabinets have portfolios. That's a section of government that they run. In Canada, we have lots of portfolios, lots of governments that are run. Government departments, that are run. I want you to look at this and see if you can see a possible reform for the Canadian system. So read through it and see if you can see how Canada would be more democratic if we institute this change. another marker. Maybe that I need to change the numbers. In order to understand this source, we need to look at the electoral system in Canada. The electoral system in Canada is called first past the post. And in order to really understand this, maybe during the break we should go outside and have a race. Anybody here think they're fast? Like they can run? They're a sprinter maybe? Ah, we've got a couple bold people, I like that. I remember my first year here, which obviously was like 25 years ago. I was teaching a class and I'm like, oh man, I'm the fastest person in this room. And there's a lot of people in the room like, no, I don't think so. Then we went out to the football field and we had a race. And I gotta say, I did not finish first. So, why don't you just go home? You can go. That's fine. You can go home and watch this. Because it's all going to be the same, right? So first past the post is we all line up and we have a race. Well, elections are like a race. So in Canada, let's say we have a race in this riding. I've added a fifth party called the Heritage Party just because, well, honestly, because I started with 20 as my root base and it would only add up to 80%, and I didn't want to admit my mistake and change them to 25. But in this scenario, the Conservatives have 20.1% of those who voted for them. But they end up winning. So now they get to represent everyone. And people may say that's undemocratic. Because more people voted against them than in favor of them. But now they represent everyone. So rather than having a system like this, people are saying, maybe we should have a system like this. This is a system we used to have, where you would prioritize. And in fact, we have a new leader of the opposition here in Canada, Aaron O'Toole, who won the conservative leadership race. But he didn't win the first ballot. On the first ballot, Peter MacKay was winning. But then they went to a second ballot, and then a third ballot, because they allowed people to rank the candidates. Not just vote, this is my favorite, but this is my second favorite, and this is my third favorite. So one possible reform for the Canadian system is to reform, how do we count the ballots? If democracy is meant to be about the rule of the people, how do we measure the rule of the people? Well, it's easiest at election time. And the obvious problem then is, well, when we have elections, are we reflecting the will of the people and how we count the votes? An added problem is apathy. So if in our riding only 50% of people voted, and this is how they voted, then only 1 in 10 Wetaskianites actually support the Conservative Party. So when you combine apathy with distortion of the will of the people through the electoral system, our democracy becomes a little muddy. So one of the things you're going to need to do is to suggest changes to the Canadian parliamentary system. And one area that you'll need to look at is the electoral system. We currently have this. What could be more democratic? Something like this. Do you see how it's more democratic? So let's say we had a vote in here and said, okay, tomorrow we're going to get a free lunch. And we had 5 choices. And one thing won. How many people do we have today? 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. Let's pretend we have 20 people here. So in 20 people, we had 5 people vote for McDonald's, and we had 4 people vote for Wendy's, 4 people vote for Subway. We had, my numbers are really great here. we had 6 people vote for Dairy Queen, and 1 person? No. Let's say that we had 5 people vote for Wendy's. It makes it even closer. So we had 6 people go for Dairy Queen, 4 for Wendy's, 4 for Subway, 5 for Wendy's, 5 for McDonald's, and we're all going to get Dairy Queen. And nobody's happy. Well, 6 people are happy. But maybe the people that voted Wendy's, their second choice was Subway. McDonald's people, their second choice was Subway. So maybe 14 people would have actually preferred Subway, but it's not their first choice. So there's a distortion of what the people actually want. We think people actually want Dairy Queen. 6 of 20 people, it was their favorite. But if people were able to prioritize, then we probably would be eating Subway instead. So one of the end activities in this chapter will be looking at the Canadian system as it is. Instead of memorizing, this is what they do at the beginning of Parliament, I want you to say, what are ways to possibly create more democracy here? How can we make it more democratic? And some changes to the electoral system might help. So when we get back from the break, we're going to do some textbook questions. You can see there's quite a few here. And that'll give you a chance to stop listening to me and to maybe get a little more engaged.